Hello, everybody. Welcome along to the Event Industry News podcast. My name is James Dixon, and as ever, I wish you a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you tune in to today's podcast from. And exciting times are ahead for the event industry. We are recording today's podcast on Thursday, the 6th of May, and last weekend, certainly in the UK, was a big weekend for the events industry. A lot of test events were run to start getting a handle and a feel for how we can safely run events post-COVID as we enter the final phases, hopefully, of this roadmap out of the restrictions and out of the lockdowns that we've been living in for the last 12 months. One of the key suppliers involved in some of this activity last weekend is a company called Event Genius, a name that I'm sure many of our podcast listeners will be familiar with. If you're not, we're going to find out a little bit more about them today and their particular involvement in some of these really important test events that took place last weekend. I'm delighted to say that joining the podcast today is Reshad Hossenally. Reshad is the Chief Supply Officer and founder of Event Genius and joins us from a lovely looking location today. Reshad, thanks for joining the podcast.
Thanks, James. Hi, everyone. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, great to have you aboard today. And as I was saying at the start then, Reshad, it was a big weekend for the events industry last weekend. You're probably still, I'm sure, in the debriefs and looking at stats and analytics coming back from it. But just for our podcast listeners who maybe weren't aware of what happened in the UK last weekend, tell us a little bit about the events that you were involved in.
Yeah, it was super important, obviously, for the industry to have these events. Obviously, there was no social distancing, no face masks. Customers were tested before the event takes place, and then they're also being tested as we speak after the events. We took part in the series of events called Circus, which are the indoor clubbing shows that happened at Bramley Moor Dock on Friday, the 30th of April and 1st of May. There was another few events going on. There was a festival at Sefton Park as well, which is more of an outdoor type show. So far, on the scheme of things, they went really well. It was great to see people back. It was great to see, the ravers happy. But as I've sort of mentioned before, is that the most important is that people in the industry were back up and working, and that was a great feeling because the industry has been completely decimated. And after so many months, whether it's companies or whether it's even freelancers or contractors, this was a real positive step forward. And we are a little bit at the bottom of the pecking order when it comes to reopening things in our industry. So hopefully this was a real positive move, and we'll see what the final test results come out like. But yeah,
and of course, as you've said, there's no social distancing, no face masks required. Something that we've not seen, and the photos at first maybe looked a bit strange to some people who've got used to people standing at a distance. And of course, that's not to say that measures weren't in place. As I understand it, people were tested and had to produce a negative lateral flow test the day before. They would then have to provide or do a test 2 days after the event, if I'm right in saying so. And of course, there were measures in place whilst the event was actually running itself, which you were very much part of. Tell us what your particular involvement was in those events.
Yeah, so there were tons of measures that were in place. For the staff all had still the normal sort of COVID safe protocols, face masks, shields, all that sort of stuff. And because the experiment was really about the customers and not so much around the staff. However, everyone had to still be tested. For our part in the event was around the cashless payment solution, which is more hygienic and tries to stop that spread basically as much as possible. Obviously, it's quick around on the bars and things like that, so people aren't congregating as much. And it was a real sort of honor to be part of these test events.
And of course, over the last 12 months, people have, if they weren't familiar already, will have very much got used to the idea of cashless payments.
Yeah.
And like I said, this is not something that's new, but it's something that is going to be vital, isn't it, as a means to continue with these events. Even though there's no social distancing, there's no face masks required, I think it's fairly obvious by now that we are going to continue with a certain level of measure that will be retained within events even beyond, post-COVID. What did you have to adapt anything within your own system in line with these new protocols? Was it fundamentally there ready to go, or was there new stuff that was rolled out for this?
There was really more of a mixture of stuff. I think there was a lot of new feature functionality that we wanted to get out. Not so much specifically because of COVID. There was some stuff that obviously just plays a good part in that. Yeah, I think that the service, the platform itself, the cashless platform itself is really streamlined and like I said, a contactless solution basically. So at the heart of it, we've been operating that for a number of years. Some of the improvements we made were things like we brought out a self-service terminal where there was no staff interaction, so the customers can just go up the terminal and use the top up their wristbands themselves. We also brought in card machine integrations and contactless payments, so customers could use their bank card or the Apple Pay and things like that to top up. And didn't have to really touch a physical device or anything like that, which was again great. As I said, the speed of our transactions are a second or so. So it's a real. It just means that you have a lot less congregation going on everywhere, and you also every bar person or vendor has their own terminals, so there's no sharing of terminals. Everything is wiped down after each event. Even the self-service solutions to tap platforms are wiped down as well periodically. There was a number of functionality. We launched some new reporting and things like that, which will help the event organizers understand their events a little bit better, where traffic flow is, and again, like I said, where the sort of the high volume areas are, where maybe they can maybe ease that and understand their events a little bit more. But yeah, I think it was all in all, the heart of it was around the hygiene element, and you gave a wristband to each customer when they came in, and then they either topped it up in advance, which was the easiest way to do it, or they could just top up on site basically.
So there was actually no physical need for them to deploy their own credit or debit cards and things like that. If they wanted to, I presume that function was there, but they could essentially just top up onto the wristbands and use the wristbands as the.
I mean, we're a full turnkey solution for event organizers. So we provide the full end-to-end service. So we provide all the hardware, all the functionality really, and even the management side of things. So for the event organizer, they just don't even have to worry about their point of sale, hardware. Anything. We come in, we give them everything they need. Whether they want to go for some event organizers go with the wristband, some event organizers prefer going completely contactless, and we can support both. So and that was a new piece of functionality actually that we have developed specifically for COVID, because we were really before mostly wristbands and RFID cards, and now we can do all types of methods of payment basically from the same terminals, which is still great. There's an element of some people still want to bring cash at an event, so you can have a top-up station just for those people, and then the people that want to go straight to the bar, they can just use Apple Pay contactless or whatever. So the site still remains cash free as much as possible basically, and contamination is reduced as much as possible.
Something you mentioned there a few minutes ago was the speed of the transaction, and I'm sure everybody who's listening to the podcast today will have been in that situation where you go into certain retailers and you go to make your contactless payment, and you're waiting, several seconds. It can feel like a lifetime sometimes for the machine to actually show approved on the screen. From a networking point of view, from a hardware point of view, have you had to upgrade anything? How important is that speed of transaction to you? Because obviously the slower the transaction is, the slower the movement of customers through a given area.
Yeah, correct. Luckily, if we're using the RFID side of things, the transactions, like I said, have always been in a second or so.
Mm-hmm.
That's the benefit, I suppose, you get over contactless. You also have obviously offline redundancy. The networks don't really play too much of a part in it. We kind of use networks really for reporting purposes. With the new contactless functionality we also have the ability to operate offline. So if for whatever reason the transactions are taking too long, or the event has a network issue, we can still the promoter can choose to accept some risk element of it and say, okay, we'll process the transaction later when the internet comes back, in order just to keep things moving and things like that. Even the access control solution is the same principle, where it's not network dependent, and all that kind of has to play a part from when the customers come in. You can't afford to have anything to fall down, because otherwise you start having stampedes and all sorts, people getting too close. And then when you go into the event, again, trying to, remove that sort of, the queues at the bar will be great as well, especially if the events have to come back at 75% capacity, or maybe even 50% capacity. We don't really know what the legislations are. Here in Liverpool, the events were at 50% capacity. So there was plenty of space for people to, if they, to walk around and stuff like that. Obviously, when the artists were on, everyone threw that out of the way. I think people even started coming into the event with masks, and by the end of it, there was just no more masks. So, I mean, in theory, you're probably safer there than you are in a busy supermarket, because everyone's been tested. No one is touching anything.
Exactly,
Supermarket, everyone is touching everything, and no one's been tested. So it's an interesting why there's so much focus on the event side of things, and
arguably, let's lay it out there. Arguably, it's safer than some of the stuff that we've been doing throughout the pandemic, which is, like you said, going into supermarkets. Yes, of course, people need to shop, and nobody's suggesting that we shouldn't have been able to go into shops and into supermarkets particularly, and to buy essential items. But you are right in pointing out that the actual protocols that are in place now for these test events is of a far more strenuous and stricter nature than being able to go into what is currently classed as non-essential retail. You can walk in and out those shops. One thing I'd like to ask you, and I don't know if this is sort of maybe putting you on the spot a bit as far as the tech is concerned, but the use of RFID wristbands now, and the tracking technology that goes with that, i.e. being able to see where pinch points are, what traffic flow was like through a particular area, etc., etc. In the scenario where 2 days after the event, all of the attendees have to do a test and somebody tests positive, is it theoretically possible to use the RFID chip that was in that person's wristband to then identify who they were in close contact with and who they weren't? Because if you've got 3,000 people at an event and one person tests positive a couple of days later, are we going to make 3,000 people all then self-isolate for 10 days? Or can we narrow it down to a group of people that were in close contact?
I mean, we don't do any sort of, in terms of tracking, in terms of from a literally sort of GPS sort of type tracking. I think that would be a little bit too overzealous on certain people. But we can certainly, wherever the touch points are, we can find out where people have come in, if they're coming into a specific venue or specific arena, if the promoter puts certain checkpoints in place, or we can sort of see what bars they've been to, what areas they've kind of been to. It's not going to be, obviously, if we're looking at sort of just the bar and vendor type data, then it's not going to be 100% of where they've 100% been. But we can sort of get an idea. We can see whether they came into the festival on that day. And we're actually launching in 10 days' time ticket management technology, where you receive your if someone buys 3 tickets, for example, generally you don't know who the other 2 people are. What this portal allows you to do is a bit like an online check-in system for your flights. So you receive your an email and a text message that says, hey, can you please activate your ticket? So you put your friends' details in there. You can send them their own ticket, and they can fill out all the information. We ask you some questions, and we therefore have every single person in the event's data, basically. And that was part of sort of our track and trace functionality,
Sure.
just to make sure that, if someone has, I know that, if someone goes to a festival, one of the things for us is like, why, we obviously don't know what the legislations will be and how much data we need. So we kind of produce this as okay, well, let's just collect every single person's information, and we can notify anyone that's actually come in contact with with someone who may have had COVID, for example. And I think, again, that was, we developed that to try and, if proposals are being put forward, so we have some events in Portugal, for example, which are 50,000 capacity, which we've been working really hard with so many partners. We've even got like a 400 staff testing center next to the festival, and everything, just to make these events happen basically as safely as possible. And part of the plans that we submitted was, we need to try and be able to contact every single person that's may or may not have come to the event, because otherwise, if one friend drops out, he's back at home and you're in Portugal, you contact them, you've got no idea whether people are isolating or anything like that. So we had to submit the most robust plan. And of course, if these measures aren't really needed or they're relaxed, then great. If otherwise, we're prepared for the worst, I suppose. And
you've literally just said what I was about to say, which is something that happens in the event industry a lot, which is prepare for the worst. When we do our risk assessments, our safety plans, any element of a live event is essentially planned for what's the worst case scenario. What if everybody congregates in this area? What if everybody goes down this path? What if everybody uses this bar? How are we going to cope with that? And I suppose we're at the absolute sort of nth degree of that at the moment, aren't we? Planning for the absolute worst case scenario, and secretly confident. I think I get this feeling with the industry. There's a secret confidence that by doing the amount of planning that we're doing, we are going to see some really positive results come out in the next week or so.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, the thing we've been working with all our partners is prepare for the worst, basically. So, like I said, we sell the ticket, we make them register through this portal. We actually then do the cashless payments. We've launched new contactless entry terminals where you scan your own ticket at the door and things like that. So we've prepared for the worst. The problem is then, what's going to be required from the events, and how does that work? So if testing is involved, then testing, do they have to provide their own testing center somewhere close to the event? Are the customers going to pay for it? For example, festivals can't afford it. It's too expensive. Or is the government? Is the free government test enough? Is the text message that you get, is that going to be enough to, when you do a lateral flow that you can just order off the government site, is that going to be enough? And I think that's the problem that we're seeing now, why we're seeing a lot of festivals cancel at the moment, especially the ones in July and August, because there's no clarity from the government, and that's causing a huge burden on these festivals, because they've had everyone in the industry has had a terrible year. Suppliers need paying. If they don't pay the suppliers, the festival can't happen. And I think we're starting to see a bit of a knock-on effect, because the insurance details haven't been outlined by the government. I think that there is talks that they are going to do an insurance for festivals if they cancel, and cover some of their costs, but no one knows what that means, how you apply for it, and how long is it going to take? Is it going to take another 6 weeks? And therefore, it's a real problem for the industry, especially the ones that have got big builds or that are close by in July and August. I think it's really positive that these events are happening. It's great that we're kind of seeing the end of lockdown in sight. Hopefully travel is going to come back as well in certain countries, but without any published guidance at the moment, no one knows what to do, or whether they can, take the risk of starting to pay suppliers and artists, because then if it cancels, they're left with a load of money that that they've kind of forked out, basically.
I think what you've said is it will be echoed by not just hundreds but thousands of people within the industry. And if it's not too bold a question to ask, is there a sense, both personally for your own business, and given that you probably work with numerous different organizers right across the industry, a sense of injustice that you're having to go through all these testing things? Shops didn't have to run test events of customers going into shops when non-essential retail opened. There were no test events for IKEA, and yet and yet an industry that's built on planning, that's now fundamentally equipped with digital platforms to help track and sell tickets, for example. So we've got some of the best data available on the customers who walk through the doors. The infrastructure fundamentally to do what Test and Trace that it was set up to do was there for the events industry. And I'm just wondering if you sort of feel like there's a bit of an injustice here.
I think for sure. I think the lack of guidance. We at the end of the day, we're all companies that are paying our taxes. We're all people working for a living, right? It's a job at the end of the day, and I think it shouldn't be regarded as, oh well, this industry isn't important, because why is one industry more important than the other? And I think that's really unfair. And like you say, the amount of planning that goes in, the amount of security, the amount of hoops you have to jump through, the professional companies that are running these things, the plans, the sanitation plans that we put in place, the sanitization plans we put in place.
Yeah.
Absolutely everything, the technology, the contact tracing, even, being able to, like I said, the technology is there now and the tests are there now for us to be able to, to test 50,000 people in 9 hours. That's kind of the plans we've submitted in Portugal, for example. So everything is there to do it. And it's almost, it's almost like running a military operation these days to try and get an event off the ground. And I feel like it is a bit, even if they didn't want to open things at a certain time or want to restrict it, which is kind of part of the roadmap, I feel that it's unfair not to publish any guidance, because no one can prepare. And to be fair as well, the government has put a huge amount of money into the Cultural Recovery Fund. And these companies, this is money from the taxpayer that to support these companies. And then they're kind of saying, well, okay, because we're giving you money, now let it burn. It's not quite right. Everyone wants to, people are taking loans, etc. Everyone wants to repay this money back, and that money should go to good use, right? It should go to creating events again, not just sat there just to burn and just make sure people can just get by, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that there's a huge grey area at the moment. There was much excitement when the roadmap was published earlier this year, and we all looked straight away at the 21st of June and those sort of that key phrase of all restrictions on social contact lifted. But it's quite obvious that since that roadmap was published, there is a huge caveat to that as far as the events industry is concerned, which is, in normal life, in everyday life, all restrictions on social contact are lifted, except if you happen to be organising something called an event. At which case, we still don't know what you're going to have to do. And I don't, so is it or isn't it all restrictions being lifted? Because it's not really. In my view, it's not really lifting all restrictions if they're still going to make something that forms a multi-billion part of our social and economic industry still go through certain measures in order to make them safe. I think that's
And yeah, I agree. I think, if by then as well, let's say all the flights are back in and you can go X, Y, and Z, you'll be sat on a plane next to someone maybe for 5 or 6 hours, and, they might reach across you, they go to toilets, etc., and you're locked in. So you're not in open air, you're not especially for the festival side of things where there's a lot less transmission. So it's kind of, okay, well, if that can kick off, so why can't we in an open air field have people that you might stand for about 30 minutes next to, not even that.
Yeah. Well, if they're talking about hands, face, and space, there's no bigger space than the music festivals, And I know that in the main arenas, people are together and they're shoulder to shoulder, but we now know, being outdoors poses, a significantly a reduced chance of transmission. You know, people are in tents. They're camping for 3-4 nights. They're in open air spaces. You know that.
Yeah, and I think also, I think if they want, it's fine. I think look, safety's first, right? Safety is paramount, and we don't want we don't want another lockdown, etc. But I think if the festivals, if they publish the guidance and just say, okay, everyone needs to be tested, and this is what you need to do, then the festivals will just crack on and get on with it, you know, and they know where the ball is, you know, you know, putting on an event and the security and all this is far harder than to try and run the testing for some people.
I agree. Yeah.
So I think it's just if it's just another part of what we have to do, it's just another part of what we have to do. But the fact there's no guidance and there's no sign of anything is the biggest problem, you know, because like I said, if safety is first, fine, we want to keep people safe, then we just do exactly what happened at the Liverpool event or whatever some people are planning, which is test people before they go in. And at least it's clear that you can commit your cost, you can make sure you can start employing people again, you can, you know, you can crack on, basically. You know, some people, it might not be for them to do the testing, fair enough. A lot of event organizers will just say, right, we'll just build it as part of our process. And this year is that's it, really.
Absolutely. And I think the thing that has always remained fundamental to me in this whole debate is the desire of audiences to get back into events. And there is clearly a desire from audiences to get back into these events, because that was shown this weekend. The events that you worked on, the pictures and the videos that I've seen going around on LinkedIn and people that I'm connected with on there and on social media and on the mainstream news, shows people who were eager to be there and who were wanted to be there and who are overjoyed at being there. And I'm sure, given that everybody is now eligible to do for 2 lateral flow tests a week that they can claim, if you ask an audience, are you willing to do this in order to go to an event? It's a resounding yes. It's obvious. So I think we're not asking too much of the audiences to do this. I think if they were told that they had to do this in order to get in, they will willingly participate in anything like this.
I mean, we had some sellout shows, right? And people were, you could see it, as you say, on their faces. And I think we ran a survey a few weeks ago, and we surveyed 140,000 customers, and you know, 90% of them will feel confident to go to an event this year. That shows you that, you know, 82% of them will want to go to 2 or more events this year. So it sort of highlights the importance. I mean, interestingly as well, 70% of them want some form of a cashless solution implemented for hygiene measures. So yes, I think it's, you know, the industry is ready to go. I mean, the amount of ticket sales that we, you know, as soon as they announce things, I mean, every single show is just selling out, basically. So people are wanting to go out. People are happy to, and I think you know, I think it's positive, and I think the rest we do a lot of events in Europe as well, and I think that, you know, that's hit us quite hard in terms of, you know, there's no sales happening whatsoever, and the promoters have got even less of an idea what's happening there compared to the UK. So for them, it's even worse, because you've got the third waves coming in, and there just needs to be some form of standard, I think, that needs to just come out and say, right, to have an event, then you need to do X, Y, and Z. And I think that'll put, you know, everyone in a much better place, really.
Absolutely. And given the question marks over travel at the moment and what's happening in continental Europe and beyond there, and the fact that arguably we're in a very strong position in terms of our own vaccination program, on our own protocols in this country at the moment, I think we should really be doing, or the powers that be need to be doing everything they can do to support the UK events industry. And if we can't work in Europe, if we can't work overseas at the moment because of travel restrictions and the difficulties in doing that, we must at the very least get our own industry domestically back up and running as soon as possible, and give these businesses a fighting chance domestically.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you know, if you look at even these events employ hundreds and thousands of people. If they start cancelling, especially a lot of people are freelancers as well, and they don't have the support from the government. So there's a lot of people that have, like I said, have been really impacted severely. Companies have been impacted severely. Ourselves, we obviously took a hit like every other ticketing company.
Sure, yeah. No event, nobody buying tickets, no ticket penalty required. It's simple maths.
We're luckily we're financially stable and we're strong, and we sell it. We're doing things in Australia, for example, which is working really well. So we've kind of had to adapt and sort of dodge around. But I think that the point here is the fact that there's a lot. If you look at a lot of the retail, a lot of the bars. Hospitality industry has been decimated as well. The travel industry has been decimated. A lot of the people that work in these industries now need to find a job somewhere else, and a lot of them will probably go towards a part-time work or freelance work at a festival or an event and things like that, which is contract work that they can get fairly easily. Now that we've got all these events planned, if they start cancelling because there's no guidance, then we just end up with a ton of unemployment again. So they're really. I think that's the biggest thing we need to push right now, and I think there's a lot of people campaigning against that. And I think hopefully the next couple of weeks will be better news really after these events. So these events were really key, I think, to really highlighting the risk element really of an event.
If you're listening to the podcast from overseas, just hop on Google and just search for Liverpool test events over the previous weekend, which would have been Friday the 30th of April, 1st of May, 2nd of May, and you maybe find out a little bit more both in the mainstream media and certainly in the industry media about what went on at these events. And I'm sure if you're listening internationally, you may be curious to see what we're doing in the UK at the moment and what companies like Event Genius are doing to support those particular event organizers with these test events at the moment. We've been joined today on the podcast by Reshad Hossenally. Reshad is the Chief Supply Officer and founder at Event Genius. Reshad, thanks for joining us today. It's been great to have you on the show. If people want to find out more, I know eventgenius.live is your website, but presumably they can find you on all the social media platforms as well.
Yeah, LinkedIn or Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or like I said, the best resource of information is always our website, and we always document a lot of what we do on our blog as well. And if you want to head there, then you'll see you'll see all the coverage that happened at Liverpool and new functionality and industry knowledge and things like that, basically.
And of course, you can follow Event Industry News as well on social media. Our Twitter handle is @EventNewsBlog. And if you just search for Event Industry News and Event News Blog on all the usual social media platforms, you'll be able to find out what we're doing and the stuff that we're up to. Lots of information on the website as well, of course, eventindustrynews.com. If you're watching today's podcast on the website via the video stream, of course, you can go over to your favorite podcast platform and you can download and listen to all of the audio versions of all of our podcasts, 200 and something episodes now to listen back to, covering all sorts of topics. Of course, if you're listening to today's podcast on one of those platforms, don't forget to hop over to eventindustrynews.com. Latest news, features, regular updates about what's happening in the industry, especially at the moment. And as I said, all of this activity, test events that are going on at the moment, as we hope, fingers crossed, in the coming weeks and months to get things back to some form of normality and get this industry back on its feet and working again. Reshad, it's been great to have you on the show today. Thanks for joining the podcast. It's been great to speak to you, and please do keep in touch. We'd love to hear about what's happening in the coming months. Let's find out, what is happening, the success of these test events as you start to be able to generate some more data and analytics. If there's anything to talk about, we'd love to hear from you, and I'm sure the people that listen to the podcast would love to hear from you as well. And that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thanks very much, everybody, for joining. Been great to have you on board, as always. Keep your eyes peeled. Loads more coming in the next week or so in terms of podcast content. Some great guests that we've got lined up. No doubt all looking at this huge topic at the moment, which really is the only thing that we need to be talking about, which is getting this industry back up and running. Thanks for joining the podcast, and we'll see you again soon. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.